Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, business, arts, food. Well, we don't really talk about food, but I have not eaten yet today, so I'm thinking about food. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which covers all of the above, again, except for the food. You can find it at CompassKnox.com. I'm joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm hungry, too. I haven't had a bite to eat yet myself, so I was...
And here we get here to the studio. Seth Barber has not laid out a buffet table for us.
I found that
cheapskate.
Well, that eating on the microphone just never comes across well. So it's for your listeners' sake that I didn't provide
those chewing noises you don't want on here. I understand. Well, let's get the show on the road so that Scott and I don't collapse of hunger before it's over. We do have several things to talk about this week. The University of Tennessee making some interesting changes to its admissions criteria for certain students. A little cluster of studies, reports, recommendations having to do with development in downtown Knoxville and other places around the city. We'll talk about those. The school board took up an interesting slate having to do with special education services this week. We will talk about that. We will be talking about Gloria Johnson running for the Senate, our own local state representative taking on Marsha Blackburn. And to start us all off, I wanted to start with just kind of a follow-up on something we talked about last week, because as we said last week, this was the controversy over the Blunt Pride Festival in Maryville, which happened last weekend on, I guess that was Saturday, September 2nd. And as we taped our show September 1st, and so that whole issue was kind of up in the air. Basically, the organizers of Blunt Pride had filed a lawsuit against the District Attorney General of Blount County, Ryan Desmond, who had threatened to try to enforce the state's anti-drag law if there were drag performances in public at the Blunt Pride celebration on the Maryville College campus. And Blunt Pride had filed this lawsuit, and we had not heard a resolution of that as of when we taped our episode last week. However, later that day, that Friday afternoon, U.S. District Judge, Federal Judge J. Ronnie Greer did issue an injunction against Ryan Desmond, the DA, and against basically all Blount County, Maryville law enforcement, and told them they could not try to enforce that state law because it is probably unconstitutional. Basically, he was agreeing with a finding by another federal judge in Memphis earlier in the year, who also found that the law was probably unconstitutional on First Amendment grounds, and he enjoined it, but that only took force in Shelby County because of the way laws and standing work. That case had been brought in Shelby County, and it was against the Shelby County District Attorney General. And of course, State Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti, after that, came out and said he was going to appeal the Memphis ruling. And also, as far as he was concerned, the law was still in effect for the rest of the state. So it was kind of this weird thing where a federal judge had found a law probably unconstitutional, but its impact was limited to one county. And so we got this Blount County DA, Ryan Desmond, decided to kind of take the state attorney general at his word and say, well, I'm going to try to enforce it in Blount County. And as you said, federal judge said, no, if it's unconstitutional, and if it's probably unconstitutional in Memphis, it is probably also unconstitutional in Maryville, because those are both part of Tennessee, and this is a state law. And the district attorney generals, are basically agents of the state there to enforce state law. And so not a real surprise there, but I think that may discourage, of course, that Memphis ruling is still under appeal at the Sixth Circuit. We'll see what comes out there. But Scott, I feel like this ruling, now that we've had 2 rulings from federal judges at either end of the state, that might discourage any other DA from stepping forward in the interim and saying, I'm going to try to enforce it someplace else as well.
Yeah, 2 of the 3 districts, the federal courts are divided into 3 districts in Tennessee. 2 of the 3 districts now have had judges who've ruled while, and I'm not a lawyer and I haven't talked to any attorneys about this, but, most of the time in my experience when I've covered cases like this, if there's a ruling in a district, it applies district-wide, not just in a county, but there may be differences. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Need to make that disclaimer. But yeah, because these now someone in Middle Tennessee, it's a different district. They might try to do something, but for the most part, I think that this pretty much quashes any real enforcement of this until there's an appellate court ruling.
Right. Yeah. So that and apparently the Blount Pride Festival went ahead as planned. Big crowd. Everybody had a good time. There was a group of protesters outside it, but there were no reports of any significant conflict or anything. So I guess that is that on that issue. Just kind of wanted to follow up and say that is what happened there. So then this past week kicked off with a fairly big, if widely expected, announcement from Gloria Johnson, who of course is a state representative who represents a chunk of Knoxville. And Scott, what did Gloria do?
Surprise, surprise, she's running for the U.S. Senate seat currently held by Marsha Blackburn, a Republican of Williamson County. And it was not unexpected. She, ever since the Tennessee 3 incident, when in the state capitol, when she and Justin Jones and Justin Pearson of Nashville and Memphis, respectively, were targeted for removal from the House because of their violation of rules, protesting the lack of progress in gun legislation, firearms regulations in the legislature. They were dubbed the Tennessee 3. They got all kinds of national attention, and Johnson then formed an exploratory committee. I think she was getting a lot of encouragement because of the high profile of that incident in the Capitol, and I think she got a lot of encouragement to run. I think there's a lot of interest in the Democratic Party nationwide in supporting her because of that high profile, and so she made the decision to run, and she kicked it off on Tuesday with it's become a tradition for anybody running statewide to do a statewide announcement. So she in the morning she made the announcement in Knoxville, and in the afternoon she was in Nashville, and in the evening in Memphis, making those announcements.
And I think she was joined by Justin Jones in Nashville and Justin Pearson in Memphis.
I believe so. Yeah,
a big show of solidarity among the Tennessee
Pearson's,
three.
Pearson's one of her campaign co-chairs, so that's and to get she's going to have competition in the Democratic primary. So before she can get to Blackburn, she's got to win the Democratic primary. Marquita Bradshaw, who ran, was it 3 years ago against Bill Haggerty? She was kind of surprised nominee for the Democrats. She's from Memphis. She's very active there, and so she's running against Johnson. Johnson's going to have to do well there in Memphis to secure the Democratic nomination. They, think that she's the odds-on favorite to do so, but you never know. I mean, Bradshaw was not the favorite 3 years ago. Anyway, Johnson is making, of course, one of her big issues is going to be firearms legislation and what she calls common sense regulation. She's not talking about bans of firearms or anything, but she is talking about universal background checks and safe storage laws and red flag laws. Those are the kinds of things that she is talking about, and talks about how polls are showing that Tennesseans overwhelmingly support such measures. And she the place she selected in Knoxville was kind of underscored that. It was right across the field from Central High School, where she was a teacher in 2008 when there was a fatal school shooting here. So that was, she made that point. Her big primary focus is talking about, family issues, things like access to health care, education, and
abortion rights.
Abortion rights. And she really hasn't really gone overboard on that. I think she kind of includes that in healthcare access, her thing. But she is definitely pro-choice, and is talks about how the Tennessee legislature, through its laws, has outlawed bodily autonomy for women, and so she's really going to hit on that, and that's part of her strategy. I mean, one of the things she's going to have to do especially in the general election, if she runs against Blackburn, is get suburban voters. I mean, that's going to be the key, because seems like most of the voters anymore who are suburban voters. She's probably not going to get rural voters, and Blackburn's not going to get urban voters, but those suburban voters. And she thinks that she says that she thinks there's been a sea change with kind of the double whammy of the Dobbs decision on abortion and the Covenant school shooting, where suburban families, especially women, are going to be more responsive to her message than they might otherwise have been.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think there's different ways to look at the campaign, because the reaction from Republicans, sort of predictably, was to immediately go on the offensive against Johnson. Blackburn very quickly, clearly she had been, or her people had been preparing for this, very quickly came out attacking Johnson as a radical socialist, a dangerous socialist. She created a website called radicalgloria.com. And I think we're going to be hearing those words a lot, kind of painting Johnson, who is certainly one of the most progressive members of the Democratic caucus in the legislature, outspokenly progressive, unabashedly progressive, I think you could say. And I saw some people, Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, kind of tweeted to the effect that, great, I hope the Democrats waste $50 million on this race, or I don't remember exactly what he said, but words to that effect, that basically this is going to be a big waste of time and money for the Democrats. Coming from the perspective that Tennessee remains, as far as we know, as of our most recent elections, overall a quite Republican statewide, Blackburn was perceived as not being very popular when she ran the first time in 2018, and there was a sense that former Governor Phil Bredesen, who was the Democratic nominee and was a very moderate, more centrist Democrat than Johnson is, that he might have a real shot at Blackburn. But in fact, she won statewide by 11 points. It wasn't even close. It was close in Knox County, but it wasn't close statewide. And so I think from the Republican point of view, it's like, okay, you couldn't win with a moderate, and now you're going to put somebody who's, to Bredeson's left for sure. And that's not going to work statewide. And, that's a very defensible position to take on it. On the other hand, though, it is true that obviously we did have the Dobbs decision. We've had all of this controversy over gun regulation in Tennessee. So the political landscape I don't know if it has shifted, but there have been interesting things that have happened on it. But the other thing, and I think and of course Johnson is going to say she's running to win, and she probably is. Like, I don't think people run statewide campaigns just to make a statement. Like, you run a statewide campaign because you want to win the office. But if you look at the logic of it from the standpoint of the Tennessee Democratic Party, and very quickly, I think we've already seen, yes, there is going to be a Democratic primary, but you're seeing a lot of Democrats coming out to rally around Johnson and support her, including a lot of the party mainstream. That they have a celebrity now, or they have 3 celebrities and this was really a gift that the state Republicans gave them. The Tennessee 3 were created by the House Republicans. That's where all of this came from. And you literally can't pay for the kind of exposure and platform that the 3 of them have had. They now routinely appear on national and international media and so forth. And that will make Johnson probably able to raise money at a national level because people know who she is, and there are a lot of progressive donors out there across the country who are probably looking for people to contribute to and support in states that they perceive as being, unfriendly to progressive policies. And so, I think what's going to be very interesting, you can say for sure Johnson's got an uphill battle. I think the interesting thing to watch is how does she do versus how Bredesen did? Mm-hmm. Because you might tend to say the logic of a moderate candidate like Bredesen running is that, he can kind of appeal to the middle. But there's also a political logic out there that says that people respond to people who take strong stands and who are outspoken and who are not kind of trying to shade their words to not offend anybody or anything. And I think there's a very good chance, and of course we're more than a year out, so we're not going to know for a long time. But I think there's a very good chance that Johnson performs statewide at least as well as Bredesen. Maybe she could perform better than him. And I think that we have not seen a statewide Democratic candidate like her in Tennessee. We haven't had a really outspoken progressive who can appeal to funders and donors, not just within the state, but outside the state, and who can, try to galvanize people behind a really kind of populist progressive message. And I think that's going to be really interesting to see play out.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. One is that you mentioned Blackburn, came out swinging. Well, so did Johnson. Mm-hmm. She attacked Blackburn as being out of touch, bought off by Big Pharma and the NRA, and just as much a danger to our way of life as Blackburn accused Johnson of being a danger to our way of life. So it's going to be, it started out tough. It's going to be a real battle. And that's one, and that goes to your point of when you said people respect people who take strong stands. Well, this is someone who's going to take a strong stand, whether you agree with that stand or not, which is one of the reasons I think that she's probably one of the most vilified members of the state legislature among Republican legislators. They really don't like her.
Yeah, and that was one thing I was going to say was that she comes into the race already somewhat in. I mean, people have been calling her a socialist and kind of everything else you can imagine for years now, and she doesn't seem to be easily rattled by those kinds of things.
She doesn't seem to be. Now, as you said, it is an uphill battle, and the one thing that you can look at when you look at we only have 3 statewide races in Tennessee, offices in Tennessee. We have governor and the two U.S. Senate seats. And when you look at the recent performances in those, plus the presidential race is a statewide thing, obviously, Republicans have been getting in excess of 60% of the vote in every recent election, except Blackburn's win over Bredesen. She got a little less than 60%. It was still
like 56-ish.
Yeah. It was still significant. Like you said, she still won by a wide margin. It was 11 points, but it wasn't 20 points. So and then part of that might have been Bredesen's popularity, because he was popular even among moderate Republicans. They have liked Bredesen, but so I think that there's that the Johnson campaign's really latching onto that as a glimmer of hope, and whether I think it would be really tough for Johnson to be able to make up that entire amount, but performing better than Bredesen is within the realm of possibilities, given the changes we've seen. Now, what we don't know is whether the changes that we've seen politically are changes in the weather or they're changes in the landscape. If they're just changes in the weather, then it does not bode well for Johnson. But if changes in the landscape could help her.
And, of course, it's going to be a presidential election year, which is probably also going to be kind of crazy. It will probably be a high turnout eletion. That could work a lot of different ways. So, it'll be interesting.
And Blackburn has always been 100% in former President Trump's camp. She's not going to change that. So a lot of the views of Blackburn will be reflected, will be, a result of what happens at the top of the ticket, and with all of the legal shenanigans going on and everything else, who knows how that's going to affect the race in the end.
And one other quick thing to mention there is it does mean, presumably, that Johnson will not be running for re-election to her legislative seat, and so that will be an open seat that Republicans will probably look to contest, because even though they already have a nearly 3/4 majority in the legislature, they would like to flip any Democratic seat they can. However, Johnson won it by a substantial margin. She got 58-59% of the vote there. Yeah. The district appears to be pretty blue, so it'll depend on who runs, but probably Johnson wouldn't be stepping away from that seat if she didn't think it was relatively safe. Of course, we'll see what happens. Next year is going to be interesting. All right, let's talk about the school board. So they had their monthly work session this past Tuesday, their voting meeting on Thursday. And we talked last month about a report that was brought to them by a special education task force that was appointed by Superintendent John Ryswick, made up mostly of parents of special education students. And that task force in August brought a report to the school board that was pretty scathing about the way Knox County Schools approaches special education. They basically said that there was a culture of resistance to providing services that parents and students were seeking, which leads to unnecessarily adversarial positions being taken by school administrators and by the Knox County Law Department. And the task force made several recommendations for changing that culture and basically making it easier for parents and students to advocate for themselves and to receive services. And The first thing that the board, or I guess the biggest thing that the board did about that this month was board vice chair, who is now the chair, Betsy Henderson. We'll talk about that in just a second. She brought a resolution this past week, basically adopting that task force report in total and saying the board formally accepts and adopts this report and its recommendations, and charging Ryswick with bringing a plan by November for how they're going to put these specific steps that are recommended by the task force in place. And that passed unanimously, really showing the board's support for, even though, again, it was a pretty scathing in some ways report about the school system itself and the way that it handles these cases. The board embraced it, adopted it, said, yes, this is a problem, we need to fix it, and told Ryswick to tell them how they're going to do it. There were also a couple of things on the agenda that started to take steps toward that. One of them was creating a new position. There was some debate about the name, so I'm not going to go into that. But basically, it'd be an in-house position, somebody with legal expertise. They're not requiring a law degree, but they say it would be preferred. Somebody with significant background in special education law. And the idea of this is to have somebody there to advise the superintendent and the assistant superintendent who oversees special education services on federal law, but also on kind of like best practices around the country, particularly when it comes to making sure that students with disabilities are included as much as possible in sort of regular mainstream classrooms. That's one of the biggest complaints and issues that the task force found was, the federal law says that students need to be served in the least restrictive setting possible, but that Knox County hasn't been doing that and has been too often kind of shunting students off into separate special education classrooms, and they want to push back against that. And so the idea of this position is that it would be somebody who could kind of head off some of these contentious cases before they turn into lawsuits, with the sense being that too often the school system has taken an adversarial stance, and then the Knox County Law Department gets involved and is just kind of all about how can we defend this in court. And there's insufficient consideration given to, well, maybe we could just do what the parents are like. Why are we saying no to this in the first place? And maybe we should be saying yes. So the goal is to have somebody who can kind of provide that in-house counsel in a way. We'll see how that plays out. There were questions about how independent that person will be and so forth. A lot of that will probably depend on who they are and exactly what charge they are really given. But the parents on the task force were supportive of this and said, yes, this sounds like something that could accomplish what we're looking for there. And, of course, they're going to continue to be watching. There was also an interesting move to contract out some services. And this is the second time we've seen this year from Superintendent Ryswick. He brought a proposal back in the winter. They had a bunch of custodial positions they couldn't fill, and so they contracted with a local custodial service to provide their janitors, their custodians in some of the schools that were having trouble filling those positions. So that contract has been operating for the last 6-7 months. This contract is to fill special education positions that they're having trouble filling, not regular teaching roles, but classroom assistants, basically educational assistants, which the school system does have their own, but they have about 60 vacancies right now that they're trying to fill district-wide, and also school psychologists and speech-language pathologists, specialized service that a good number of special education students need, and they just don't have enough of them in the school system. So they're contracting with this outside company, ESS, which provides this kind of staffing to school systems across the country. It is arguably a form of outsourcing. Now, Ryswick and his administrators say it's not really outsourcing because they're keeping the staff that they have, and they say they're continuing to try to hire in people to fill those positions. But in the meantime, they have these vacancies, and this company is going to help them fill them on a short-term basis. But, there's some interesting wrinkles to it because they're actually going to be paying the company, and the company is going to be paying its workers more than the existing school employees who have these jobs are being paid. And some school board members were uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, typically when you think of outsourcing, you're outsourcing to save money on employee costs.
Right.
So the private company can hire people at a lower rate than what you're paying, and that saves you money. This is completely the opposite. And instead of, they're, like you said, they're going to be paying more. So the cost of the school system is going to be higher than it would otherwise be, unless they decided to raise salaries to be more competitive. But instead of going that route, they're going this
right. Well, and that's
route.
what some board members said. Like, this is something we need to do ourselves to pay more. Now, to be fair, they did raise those education assistant salaries by 12% this past year. They did get a big boost. On the other hand, that only brings the starting salary of those positions to about $22,300. So still pretty low paid. The contract employees who would be coming in would be making, I think it's about $25,000 a year. So still not that much, but more than the school employees. Nevertheless, it did pass despite some of those concerns. And again, parents of special education students basically said, look, kind of anything you can do to try to fill those roles, because the most important thing from their point of view is having the people in the classroom to provide services and support to students, and that's what they're trying to do. So we will see how all that plays out. Reverend John Butler, who did end up voting for the contract, but he did raise a concern saying, this is the second sort of contract like this we've seen this year for services. It makes me nervous about what the next thing is going to be. Like, he was kind of saying, I don't want to get into the habit of just kind of contracting out more and more of our core services. They did vote to remove one portion of the contract, and we'll have to see how the company reacts to that. But the company actually wanted the school system to, on its own job recruiting website, where they try to recruit people to come work for the school system, to also have a link to ESS, to their company, to help them recruit. And board member Daniel Watson said, that's really kind of like working at cross purposes here. If the whole thing is that we can't recruit enough people, but they know how to and they can go do it, but then they want us to do the recruiting for them, that doesn't really make sense. And that was a split vote. I think some board members were okay with leaving that in there, but that was ultimately how they ended up approving the contract with that portion taken out. I guess we'll see if the company comes back and says, nope, we're not going to do it unless you let us recruit through your website, and see what happens there. But just a lot of interesting conversation. And, I think the big picture to this was that this shows actually a lot of action in the last 6 months on special education, and a lot of responsiveness so far from the administration to it. Ryswick has said from the beginning, he's been in the office now, a year and not quite a year and a half. But, he came in saying he wanted to take top to bottom look at everything and be honest about where there were deficiencies and try to remedy them. And so far, the parents on this task force are saying, we like what we're seeing, we like what we're hearing, but they're also saying, we're going to keep an eye on this and make sure that you all actually do the thing. We want to see actual real changes. And so we will see what happens. Interesting collection of studies of various kinds, one being contracted for by the city of Knoxville, one being presented to the city by East Tennessee Realtors. Also discussion about missing middle housing this past week at City Council. Scott, what's going on with development in the city of Knoxville?
Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on. We won't go too in-depth on any one aspect, but just real briefly, the city has let out a contract with Walker Consultants, which is an Indianapolis firm, $87,000 to conduct a traffic study downtown in Fort Sanders. And it's not traffic, parking study. They're going to be looking at everything comprehensively, from parking garages and surface lots to technology like parking meters and and how on-street spaces are used for commercial loading and for the scooters and bicycle rentals and things like that. Kind of how it all works together. And enforcement. Fort Sanders is an area, of course, where the city does have meters and does enforce parking. Down there, it's growing by, it's the most densely populated neighborhood in the city. It's growing, and then you've got UT, which is also growing. It's a student enrollment's skyrocketing. There are those new apartments that are going up on Cumberland Avenue, so there'll be a lot of new residents in that area. So the city thought that would be an appropriate area to look at. Downtown, obviously, downtown is one of those funny things that people who don't go downtown much say you can't park downtown. People who go downtown frequently, like you and I do, we know that you can always find some parking downtown. Sometimes you got to look a little bit harder than others, but they're going to be looking at how the operations go, from top to bottom. One key thing here is that the area they're going to be studying in relation to downtown also includes the Magnolia Avenue Warehouse District, where the new stadium is being built. One of the things that has been kind of an item of discussion about the stadium is parking. The Boyd Sports and city officials have said, there's a lot of parking in the area. You don't necessarily need dedicated parking for the stadium. They're parking garage.
And to be a real urban stadium, they didn't want it surrounded. Well, there's not even room, but they didn't want it surrounded by a sea of parking, basically.
Yeah, when you look at stadiums elsewhere, and Smoky Stadium in Sevierville is one of is an example where you've got a large parking lot in front of the stadium itself, and so they really didn't want that, but they also have said, there's plenty of parking. Well, they're looking there, while and city officials have said, Cheryl Ball, who's the new chief policy officer, said that, we're including it, but it was one factor. It wasn't the only factor, but we will be looking, and it will be interesting to see what exactly they show as if they're if they agree with the previous studies that have been done, and they're going to take all the data from the previous studies and incorporate that into what they're looking at, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. But nobody's looked at it as comprehensively, but they're going to be taking a look at that, and it'll be interesting to see what kind of recommendations they come up with, if any at all, about how to accommodate more parking around the stadium, where, if, as anticipated, it is successful in drawing people to the old city, then people are going to have to park somewhere. And
and I just know from my time at the city, where we worked on some parking things. At that time, it was mostly to do with we raised parking meter rates.
Yes.
We standardized parking garage rates, those kinds of things. And I will tell you that there are few issues that make people lose their minds more than parking. People take parking very, very seriously. They take it very personally. When if you give somebody a parking ticket, man, it's like you insulted their mother. I mean,
I know it.
It can be a sort of weirdly emotional issue for a lot of people. So definitely be interesting to see what comes out of that. And so then there was another study that was presented to the city having to do with development in another part of town.
Yeah, well, speaking of issues that kind of raise passions, the South Waterfront is one of those, especially from people who live in South Knoxville. The East Tennessee Association of Realtors, and the city also partnered with them in commissioning this study by an organization called the Counselors of Real Estate Consulting Corps. It's a mouthful of a name, but they looked at the South Waterfront and at the development there. They looked at the vision plan from the early part of the early 2000s. I think it was 2006 when it was approved. they looked at that. They looked at development patterns, all that, and they came up with some recommendations. They targeted kind of 4 areas of the South Waterfront for the city to focus on as far as promoting development. And I run through those real quickly. First is what they called Site 1, which is on the west side of Chapman Highway over Blunt Avenue, where the terminus of the pedestrian bridge to UT would be if they build it. This study emphasized that their findings had nothing to do with the bridge, whether the bridge was built or not. They were looking at this. They basically said, jump in and improve river access, improve the amenities down there, allow uses on these properties like food trucks, festivals, things like that. Go ahead and do that now, as soon as you can, and also do road improvements. One of the streets that is slated for improvements is Hawthorne Avenue, which comes from Chapman Highway. If you're going south on Chapman Highway, instead of turning on Blunt Avenue, you can turn up and go down Hawthorne to the same area. And you don't have to go through that very narrow railroad overpass. And so they're talking about improving that and doing some things. So that's one site. Site number 2 is the Sevier Avenue commercial corridor. And they said, hey, you guys have done great there. And they've got, because there are a lot of restaurants and shops and businesses along Sevier Avenue. They're locally owned. They kind of sprang up organically once the South Waterfront project started going through. And so they said, keep going. They did note, and this is what's going to raise some hackles. I'm surprised it hasn't already, but one of the things that they said was that in the South Waterfront Code, which is a form-based code, it's not a land use code really. It's the use is secondary to the buildings and what they look like and how they function. The code calls for what's called transparency in the ground floor, which means windows and doors, for lack of a better term. But that's to encourage retail and restaurants in the ground floors of these residential buildings. Well, developers have gone in and gotten variances that you don't have to do that in many cases. Well, there's what the study found was that actually encouraged the development of Sevier Avenue. Because if you wanted to open up a retail space in South Knoxville, that was where you had to go on the South Waterfront. That's where you had to go. You didn't have the option of going into these residential buildings that were being built, and because they were getting variances to where they didn't have to put these in. So they said, let's do away with that part of the code. And let me tell you, the mere mention of getting rid of a portion, one jot or tittle of the South Knoxville Code will bring some opposition.
Yeah, well, because a lot of the people who worked on it still live down there and are very much engaged.
Yes. Now, on the flip side, they said do away with that, and that will help encourage more development along Sevier Avenue and presumably Blunt Avenue and Scottish Pike on the other side of the bridge or the highway, Chapman Highway. One on the flip side of that, they said city's been giving away way too many of these variances. So it's, take away that, there's no variances that would go for that, but there are other variances too, and one of them has to do with the size of the buildings. They said stop it. You need to stop giving variances for these big, huge buildings. They need to be smaller scale. And so they're on the one hand calling for the elimination of one part of the code. On the other hand, they're calling for a stricter interpretation of the code and application of the code to new developments. Moving on to Site 3 is the industrial area there where Holston Gases and Marathon Petroleum have their facilities. They have been one of the things is the consultant said, "Oh, that'd be a great place to develop if they'd sell," and they're not going to. They've been very resistant to it because, after all, that's where they've been running their businesses for decades. So they did suggest that the city either create or bring in a nonprofit that already does this, and there are a couple that would feasibly be able to do it as kind of the development agency for the riverfront, and keep open dialogue with the business owners there, the owner, and try to encourage them to find other places for their business and relocation, and come up with incentives for them to do that and that sort of thing. But it's kind of a wish thing because those businesses have been there for a long time and really aren't interested in moving, from what I understand. An interesting aside in all that is a change that an infrastructure change they talked about was on Sevier Avenue going toward the old Baptist Hospital site and Gay Street. The road splits. There's if you're going eastbound or westbound, you kind of go off on your own around a little area,
a little hillock.
Little hillock. Well, what they are talking about doing is closing that, making the eastbound lanes just a 2-lane street, and that would free up that area where the road is and the hillock as a fairly decent sized parcel there fronting Gay Street, where where it comes across where Gay Street kind of turns into Blunt Avenue and Sevier Avenue right there at the end of the bridge. It fronts that. It would be what, in their opinion, a very nice corner developable property. So that would be something that they recommended that is within the realm of possibility, a lot more than getting Holston Gases and Marathon Oil or Marathon Petroleum to sell. And then their fourth site is really not the site necessarily, but it's the entire coastline of the waterfront, and the cleaning it up, giving better access, pathways, things like that, even before development happens, just to try to help spur development, but to go ahead and beautify and put amenities into the entire length of the riverfront. The city so far has just taken it under advisement. They're not planning to do any of these things yet. They said that David Brace, who's the new chief of staff to Mayor India Kincannon, said that they'll be looking forward to implementing some of them, but they really haven't had time to formulate any kind of plan to actually implement it. Okay, we'll move on. One last thing. We talked about missing middle housing. We won't go into as much detail as we had in the past on that. We had Bentley Marlowe's proposal to
city council candidate.
Bentley Marlowe. City council candidate used a seldom used process that citizens can use to propose amendments to the zoning code. His amendments would make it easier to build what's called missing middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, small scale apartment buildings, reducing setbacks, those kinds of things. And also the one of his proposals would have eliminated the owner occupancy requirement for accessory dwelling units. When you have you build a little secondary house on your property, or a garage apartment to rent out, granny flat. That's what that is.
I want to start a band called the Flat Grannies.
Ooh, there you go. You just really distracted.
Sorry,
I've got images going in my head that I don't want to share. But the city now requires that if you have one of these or build one of these, you have to live there. It's an owner occupancy requirement. When it's very easy to get around, but we'll put that aside for now. At Tuesday's city council meeting, Marlowe's actually going to take that out. And he had one that had been approved by Planning Commission, was going to city council as an ordinance amendment, and he was going to take it out. They ended up saying, no, we're going to kick that back to Planning Commission, which they also did with the other 3 related proposals that would have dealt with setbacks and parking requirements and things like that for middle housing to make it easier to build. It all got sent back to Planning Commission.
Partly because Mayor Kincannon's administration is also introducing their own plans.
Yeah. Right? The Kincannon administration, they did this last Friday, or 2 Fridays ago now when this starts airing, where they are going to propose that this middle housing, they're trying to drop the word missing. They just make it middle housing. Which,
right. Well, if you build it, it's not missing anymore.
If you build it, it's not missing anymore, and it does kind of make grammatical sense, so I'm kind of glad they're doing it. But the middle housing, their proposal is to allow middle housing in kind of the old traditional neighborhoods inside the I-640 bypass, essentially. These are designated traditional neighborhoods in the zoning code, so those would be allowed there. And that's where the existing middle housing exists. What exists in the city exists in those areas, because it was all allowed before World War II when these neighborhoods were developed. So they're going to focus it there. It would not apply to areas like West Hills or Fountain City or Holston Hills or South Knoxville. Areas where it is also very convenient because those are areas where they are very vocal, and homeowners groups or neighborhood associations, and would make that a much more difficult proposition to get through. I think that they take a more skeptical view of this more higher density housing that they're talking about than folks who live inside the Beltway do. So they're going to they've got that proposal out. That's going to go to the Planning Commission too. It has to go first there. So all this is going to they're dumping all this on the Planning Commission for the Planning Commission's October meeting is essentially what's going to happen. So come early October, we'll have a chance to go delve into this more deeply, because that's all they're going to. That'll be the big stuff that Planning Commission is going to consider. A couple of things real quick. The city and their plan, they have 2 open houses scheduled, one for the 21st of this month at Emerald Youth Foundation on Central. Another open house at the John T. O'Connor Center on the 25th, so people can find out what they're talking about. And then there's also going to be a city council work session on the 28th. So there's going to be lots of public talk about middle housing later on this month.
Right. If you're tired of hearing about middle housing, sorry.
Yeah.
You're going to hear some more.
Yeah. Welcome to our world.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the University of Tennessee. We're recording this Friday morning, and the UT Board of Trustees just had a special called virtual meeting this morning to talk about making some changes to admissions criteria for certain students. Scott, what are they doing?
Well, what they're doing is they're wanting to increase access to in-state students. More than, I think it's a little bit more than 60% of the in-state students who graduate like in the top 10% of their class go to school out of state. They want to keep those students here, so they're going to make it easier for in-state students who go through early admissions, and that's a key, because this is just and what they're doing is they're going to guarantee for certain students that they will be admitted to the University of Tennessee if they hit these criteria. So, and it's guaranteed. I mean, all you've got to do is send in your application, and you are in, and that is. That applies to all of the University of Tennessee campuses, not just Knoxville, but Martin and UT Southern and Chattanooga. The thing is, it applies to these students. If you're in the top 10% of your class in any Tennessee high school, you're in. If you're got a 3.2 grade point average a 4.0 grade point average or higher, you're in. Period.
I remember when you couldn't get higher than a 4.0.
I do
I know
too.
that was a long time ago.
I do too. I'm old too. I don't. That's the new math, is what as they used to say. Those two criteria were passed for all campuses. So this will begin for the incoming class of 2024, which means now, if you're applying now to the University of Tennessee, to any of the campuses for early admission, if you're in the top 10% of your class, or you've got a 4.0 or better grade point average, you're in. You don't have to worry about anything. Now there's another criteria they were looking at, and it is one that applies at the three smaller campuses, but not at UT Knoxville. This was a change they made as they were talking. If you're a senior and you have a 3.2 grade point average, and you have an ACT composite score of 23 or higher, or an SAT score of 1130 to 1150 or higher, you're in. You can go to Martin, you can go to Chattanooga, you can go to UT Southern. That does not apply to UT Knoxville. And the reason that they pulled it out, they were going to do that, they pulled it out. One of the issues is Chancellor Donnie Plowman talked to the Board of Trustees and said, we don't know how this will affect us, and we think it might have some unintended consequences. It's actually a little bit low. The GP or the GPA requirements actually a little bit, or the ACT requirements a little lower than what typical UT Knoxville students have to hit anyway. So they're going to look at how that will affect things. So they talked about other states that have done similar, made similar accommodations for their high school seniors. Texas famously did that. They did similar multi-criteria things, but what happened was the University of Texas flagship campus at Austin, they were able to fill their classes with just people who were in the top 10% of their class, and
not leaving room for anybody else.
Yeah, they didn't need to worry about anybody else. They already had, they were doing that, and so they dropped the other criteria. That's all they look at. In fact, you have to get in about the top 6 or 7% of your class now, if you're in a Texas high school, to be able to get into Austin automatically. Now, these aren't minimum standards. If you apply at the regular time and not early application, these don't apply to you. This is just what they're doing is they're trying to get the 60% or so of students who fall into these categories, who attend or Tennessee high schools, who go out of state. They might go out of state to another state institution in other states. A lot of states do that for counties that are on the border, like Chattanooga area. You can go to the University of Georgia as an in-state student, for example, and Tennessee does the same thing. So, or they could be going to a private school. They could be going to Harvard, instead of UT. But what UT wants to do is they want to capture some of those in-state students.
Right. Keep more of Tennessee's top students in state and at UT.
Yes, as Randy Boyd, the president of UT, said this morning, the best and brightest of UT students. So now it shouldn't have much of an effect on the three smaller campuses, but quite frankly, they're not as popular, I guess is a good way to put it. There's not the demand for spaces there. They have capacity, and UT Knoxville is a different story, though, because UT Knoxville could be, someone's number 2 choice or number 3 choice. If I don't get into Vanderbilt, I want to go to UT, or I don't get into University of North Carolina, I want to go to UT. And this is a thing as well. You don't have to wait to hear from them because we'll take you. You're already here, and they anticipate that'll add a few hundred students, maybe 250 to 500 students at UT. Chancellor Plowman said that just admitting people from the top 10% of their class would add 200, about 200 students, right? And these are admitted students, not just applicants, because they're going to get more applicants. That's pretty much a no-brainer, but it's the people who actually choose UT, and they, like I said, they have to do this early. They can't wait till later in the process. So that is going into effect. Knoxville will report back to the trustees during the course of the year to see how it's going, and they might add that third bucket of criteria, but it's passed. That's the way it is. So if you're a senior or you're a parent of a senior and your kid is in the top 10% of the class or meets those other criteria, they've got a spot at UT.
All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see what effect all of that has. Okay, Seth, why don't we take a break? We will come back and do our Q&A. Okay, we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we go onto our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, which you can join if you are a Compass subscriber, which you can become by going to CompassKnox.com. And we ask our readers if there's anything they would like to hear about on the podcast beyond the obvious headlines of the week. And we had a couple questions this week, Scott, about a property that we both know well and is actually in my neighborhood, lovely Oakwood Lincoln Park. And this is the former site of the Fort Loudon Waste and Recycling Company. What is going on at that site?
Well, that was a site, as people may recall, 4 years ago. There was a huge fire.
Huge.
Giant
plumes of black
billowing
smoke.
Black smoke heading into the atmosphere that went over in the skies over Fountain City even and everything. It was a pretty spectacular fire anyway. So this fire destroyed the Fort Loudon Waste and Recycling Fort Loudon Waste and Recycling facility.
Which was already not beloved by the local residents, I will say.
Residents hated it. There were trucks going in and out bringing things to be recycled, and it's recycling. It's close to being a landfill almost, It's
and it is right in the middle of a residential neighborhood, surrounded on all sides.
This is
houses.
one of those old neighborhoods that was developed before the differentiation of residential and commercial and industrial properties that happened after World War II. So you've got a railroad track running through the middle of a residential area with industry next to it because the railroads serve industry. That's the whole point. And so anyway, this property there had been residents had complained about for a long time. This fire happened there, and since then, they really haven't done anything with the property, and residents there have been complaining that nothing's really been done with the property. There's still people coming in and out. There's still it's still an eyesore. It's still it's just something needed to be done to improve that property, and they've been complaining about it and wanting to know why the city can't just do something about it. Well, this week, something has been done about it, not by the city of Knoxville, but by the owners who've put it up for sale. It is on the market for $8.7 million. And it's a pretty good sized chunk of property. I believe it's 11 or 12 acres, and it's, as I said, it's served by rail. It's zoned for mixed use industrial or industrial mixed use, which means almost anything can go there. Light industry can go there, commercial can go there, residential can go there, combination of all three can go there. It's a real whoever has that $8.7 million to invest in this property has lots of options, and so we obviously just got listed. We don't have any idea who is going to be buying it and what they're going to be doing with it, but that is progress is being done. One thing is the company has not paid their property taxes since the fire, so whoever buys it's going to have to cover that property tax bill, and then so there's this. Of course, everybody that I've already seen that on social media, a lot of people who live in Oakwood Lincoln Park or care about Oakwood Lincoln Park or just interested in development have already thrown out ideas for what they want to see there. Well, ultimately it's going to come down to whatever the entity is that has $8.7 million to buy that property is going to determine what goes there. But they've got options. They're not restricted to. It doesn't have to be an industrial use at all. So and that'll be interesting to see what some developer decides to do with this big property in the middle of a residential area in this day and time.
Well, and we were talking about the whole middle housing issue, and the fact that housing density in existing neighborhoods tends to run into a lot of opposition. But this is clearly a site where you could do an apartment complex there. You could do quite dense housing there with probably a great number of units on a site that big, depending, of course, on the contours of the site. Probably there's environmental remediation that needs to be done there. There's probably a bunch of things that'll need to happen for it to be developable. But it is a place that I think you could probably put a fair amount of housing density in the middle of a neighborhood. And I can't speak for my neighbors. I don't know exactly what people would say about it. But I think that people would probably be so glad that something productive is being done there that is not industrial, that it might not run into a lot of opposition.
Well, one thing about in that neighborhood also, last week there was a proposal for an apartment building, essentially. Well, it ended up getting changed. It's more townhouses. On Chickamauga Avenue, there was in an area surrounded by nothing but single-family houses, except for a strangely zoned apartment building next to this, and city council rejected it. Mm-hmm. It was basically, what the neighbors had said was spot zoning. They were all the neighborhood association, a lot of neighbors against building this apartment complex. However, that was a different story. First of all, it had to be rezoned. It was in the middle of a bunch of single-family houses. This property would not need to be rezoned to get that kind of density. And while it is at one edge, has single-family houses, 65 of which had to be evacuated during the fire. But it has single-family houses. But on the other side, you've got a railroad track. And you've got on the other end, you've got more industrial sites. So it's more of a transition thing. And it's also, I believe, on a bus line, mm-hmm. Which is one of the things is you want to see more, when you build an apartment building inside the city limits, especially, you want to see some interconnectivity. You want to sidewalks, transit stops, those kinds of things. They've got it all here that site on Chickamauga did not have. And
easy access to the areas along North Central that are continuing to redevelop with restaurants and brew pubs and so forth. I mean, not to say that it's going to be residential, as you say. That would be up to whoever buys it and what they think they can do with it.
You can put a widget factory in there as long as the widgets are light. Right. It's going to be light industrial, not heavy industrial.
Be interesting to see. Certainly for me and my neighbors, it will be interesting to see. Okay, looking ahead to next week, Scott, the Planning Commission, as we just mentioned is going to be meeting this week, although we were talking about what they're going to be talking about in October with all of those middle housing proposals. What are they talking about this week?
Well, there's lots of things on the agenda, but there's one item that's gonna just suck all the air out of the room.
Does it rhyme with photo?
It does. It is a proposal for the Choteau area of southwest Knox County near Farragut, between Farragut and the river. The Dominion Group, which they've been building, they've built they're building a complex on the South Waterfront, which we talked about earlier. They're
also not beloved by neighbors.
Because they got some of those variances we talked about.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's go on. Let's move on. The Dominion Group is wanting to build 56 townhouses on a piece of property in the Choteau area right on North Shore Drive out there, and neighbors out there are absolutely livid over the proposal.
That might even be an understatement.
Yes, now the property's already zoned for this kind of density, 56 townhouses. Part of the opposition stems from the concerns of flooding and of traffic. Well, as someone who has covered county or the planning commission for the last 4 or 5 years, let me tell you, every development in the county gets opposed because of flooding and traffic. They will have to come up with an engineering plan that meets the standards of Knox County Engineering Department. They'll, every confidence they will. They have to, or they can't get the development plan approved. And then they're also talking about putting in a turn lane on North Shore there, and helping pay for that. That's all. Those are our standard things. What makes this unusual, and what has really raised the hackles of people who live in the Choteau area, is that this is going to be affordable housing. This is going to be these townhouses are going to be built so that people who qualify for Section 8 vouchers can live there. And Choteau is a very high income, high property value area of the county, and folks do not want subsidized housing there. They just don't. And so they're fighting it tooth and nail.
They've enlisted outside help.
Yeah, they've got a PR firm that has an interesting history, and
which we'll probably talk about next week.
Yeah, we'll get into that next week probably. Anyway, but anyway, they've got this. They had a rally on Tuesday night out at Concord Park against it. I don't know how well attended it was. I was covering city council on Tuesday night. I couldn't be in two places at once. So, but they really are dead set against this, and they've got a couple of opportunities to block it if that's what ends up happening. The planning commission is going to be looking at the development plan, which is basically the buildings. I mean, it's not who rents the buildings, but the buildings themselves. And as said, it's already zoned properly. If they meet all the setback requirements and all of the those kinds of things, then the planning commission will probably approve it, because they don't. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at the technical aspects of this plan that is there, and it doesn't matter if somebody's going to be buying the townhouses, renting the townhouses, renting the townhouses with subsidies from the federal government. However, that goes. And the subsidies. Here's the thing: the subsidies. There's a real big misconception about Section 8 housing. This project a family of four can have an income of up to about $52,000. Now, that's the median family income in Knox County. So we're talking about a large number of people who would qualify. Now, obviously, people are going to be making less than that who could go there. But I mean, we're talking, and this is a high income level area, but there are a lot of service jobs and a lot of jobs in the area that are lower paying. You've got Turkey Creek nearby. You've got, all the commercial businesses in Farragut. Mentioned earlier the teaching assistant, who has a couple of kids.
Well, even a school teacher. I mean, starting salary for a school teacher is in the $46,000 range. So if it's a teacher by themselves or supporting a family or whatever,
supporting a family, whatever, they would qualify for this property to be able to live here. And these are people who teach your kids. These are people who serve your kids and serve your family when you go to a restaurant. These are people who wait on you in a store, things like that. And really, there aren't many housing options for people in that income level in West Knoxville. In Farragut, the median price of a house is almost $700,000. Mm-hmm. So it's it's tough. There aren't many places for people to live, and that's what this is doing. But the people in Choteau are very much dead set against it, and as I said, the planning commission is going to do that. The other aspect of this is, in order to make affordable housing work, you have to be very creative as a developer in the financing. They're going to be getting low income tax credits, and they're going through the county to get federal home funding, and they're also going to be seeking a payment in lieu of tax agreement with Knox County. Those kinds of things the county commission votes on. And while I cover planning commission, and we'll be covering this on Tuesday, assuming that the planning commission approves it, you'll have the assignment of covering them when they come to county commission.
The fight will come to county commission,
and that's where, to be honest, that's where the there's a little bit more latitude and responsiveness to public opinion, but we will see, because one of the things that Mayor Glenn Jacobs has written in support of the development, everyone acknowledges that we need, as a county, we need more affordable housing options, and here is one. What are you going to do about it? Right. So, and this is a group that has they've got a track record. They do both market rate and affordable housing projects. They've done affordable housing projects. They know how to do it. It's not, it's so it will be one of those battles between developers and neighbors that we see play out on a regular basis.
Yeah, but because of the resources that everybody involved has, this one has the makings of a real sort of Godzilla scale NIMBY fight.
Yeah, when Oakwood Lincoln Park Neighborhood Association was fighting against that apartment complex on Chickamauga Avenue, they did not have a PR firm to represent their interests and hold protest rallies and things like
Send
that.
Out press releases.
Yeah, so it's a very different. That adds a new dimension to what would otherwise be a very typical zoning battle or land use battle.
Well, that'll be interesting, and that is happening on Thursday, and Scott, you'll be covering that Thursday afternoon. By the time it's done, you might be ready for a beverage, and if any of you out there are ready for a beverage Thursday evening, we invite you to join us. We are having, so this past week, right at the first week of September, was our 5th anniversary of Publishing Compass. Thank you to all of our subscribers and readers who have made it possible for us to, make a living and keep doing this for the last 5 years. We thought it would be fun to just have a get-together, and we're going to do it in Happy Holler at the location that has been offered to us by our friendly neighborhood producer right here, Lord Seth Barber with Barbarian Productions. Seth, why don't you tell the people where and when this get-together is going to be?
Okay, so Thursday, like you said, we're open all day. It's normal hours. We open at 10 a.m., but officially we'll start this off around 5 with cocktails, and then we'll do a live podcast while we're there in our private back room, which is for rent for other purposes if you guys are interested. But it's 1207 Central, right there in the middle of Happy Holler, next door to Central Cinema, across the street from Flats and Taps and Relics and the whole neighborhood there. So it's a pretty easy location. It's
the E-Vape Lounge.
I was about to say, Seth, what is the name of the establishment?
Right, the sign on the wall is actually changing to the Pirate Tavern. We've the nomenclature has gotten so out there that everybody calls us the Pirate Bar or the Tavern Place or something like that. That E-Vape got a little confusing. So
for those who have not been there, it is actually a pirate bar. It's pretty cool. It's like there's a pirate ship inside the bar.
The bar is a pirate ship.
The bar is a pirate ship.
Right. We've got like 40-something different rums ranging from $5-$6 a glass to $40-$50 a glass. Brandies are another one of the specialties. We're sticking with the pirate theme, food menu, the whole thing. So we'll have all that going, and then we'll do the live podcast afterwards. We'll have a Q&A section. You'll have to actually see us all in the flesh. It'll be fun.
And so, again, this is going to be starting around 5 p.m. on Thursday, September 14th at 1207 North Central at the Pirate Tavern, a.k.a. the E-Vape Lounge. And Scott and I will be there hanging out, happy to just chat with folks. You can even come if you're not a subscriber. If you're a podcast listener, that's good enough for us. You can even come if you're mad at us, although if you're going to do that, maybe buy yourself a drink first and see if that puts you in a better mood. And then we will do an actual live taping of the podcast, or attempt to. We've never tried that before. We'll see how it all goes, but should be a good time. Anything else you want to add for the folks, Seth?
No, that's it. It's eBayLoungeKnox.com is that business's website.
And speaking of parking, where should people park?
We have all sorts of parking down there in the holler right now. On the west side of Central, there's a couple of nice big lots. On the east side of Central, there's a few different lots. There's some street level parking. We're inside Old North Knoxville, so if you're an Old North Knoxville resident, you know how to get there. It's just a short walk, maybe a block or so. We got scooters that show up all the time, so there's plenty of scooter running arounds in there. Right there at the base of the holler is where you'll find us.
All right. Well, we're looking forward to it. Thank you for hosting, Seth. We really appreciate it, and certainly invite all of you to come out.
Absolutely. We'd love to see everybody in person. We started doing some of these kinds of get-togethers after we launched Compass. Then COVID hit, and we haven't been able to do that. And now it's been 5 years, which they've flown by. And while COVID isn't over, it is the fear level has dropped enough so that we thought we'd try it, and look forward to seeing people out there. Come on out and have a cocktail with us. Stick around for the podcast,
or have a non-alcoholic beverage. We are certainly not pushing alcohol on anybody.
I'm going to have a non-alcoholic beverage because I'm going to be covering the Planning Commission earlier in the day, and then going here to this event. And then after the event, I'm going to have to write the story from the Planning Commission meeting. So
the glamorous life of a local journalist, folks.
Yes. So I will be.
Wait, are you saying that you can't drink and write at the same time? What kind of reporter are you?
I did not say that. But
he's got to get home to be able to write.
Yes.
So that part's
well,
important.
and then we will be taping next week's podcast the morning after all of this. So I guess we'll see how big a party that was. We'll be back next week to talk to you about all of that and anything else that happens between now and then. Anything to add?
I have nothing to add except thanks for listening, thanks for subscribing, and we'll talk to you next week.
I'm going to go get a burrito. Talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.